Hey students, welcome to our first lesson on theories of personality. Theories of personality is going to be a unit that a lot of you enjoy because it is the one that seeks to actually answer the question of who we are and explain human behavior. The theories that you hear are going to be, some are outlandish, some are freaky, but all of them give us more insight into describing, explaining, predicting, and influencing human behavior. You're going to like this one. We start most of our discussions about personality with Sigmund Freud, and the reason for that is because he's one of the first ones to start theorizing about who we are and why we do the things that we do. So Sigmund Freud's psychosexual stages of development explain that personality is stemmed from the childhood, and it comes from these unconscious motives and conflicts that come from childhood. You'll hear more about Sigmund Freud in this. You'll also hear about the trait theorists in this video, and in the future, psychodynamic theory, social cognitivists, and the humanists, and how we learn to become the people that we are. But first, like most of our lessons, we're going to talk about first what personality is, the person's feelings and motives that drive our behavior. So when we're talking about personality, that's what we mean, the motives behind our behavior. These are the reasons that we do the things that we do. All right, we're going to start our talk with the trait theory, and then we got to define what a trait is. So a trait is an aspect of personality that's considered to be reasonably stable, and we assume that a person has certain traits based on how the person behaves. So we can draw conclusions based on what we see in people's behavior. If you were to look at cheerful, clear-headed, caring, clean, and confident, use those to describe your friend. If a person is shy, you would not expect that person to be out at social situations, like being the center of the attention. No, you would expect that person to be more withdrawn and maybe uncomfortable in a social situation. They're going to be quiet, right? So trait theorists have generally assumed that traits are fixed somehow, that they're unchanging. But questions about traits has changed over time. We'll start our talk on trait theory with Gordon Allport. Now, in the 1930s, Allport searched through a dictionary, and he looked at all the different words that we can use to describe characteristics of human beings. He cataloged over 18,000 traits, and he had to do that by hand. And this is from a list of descriptive words. Now, some of those words are physical traits like short or blonde, and some of them are emotional like behavioral traits like they're shy or quiet, and some are just like honesty and courageous and moral traits. 18,000 different words to describe people. So there's going to be lots of different ways that we can describe people. But Allport assumed that traits can be inherited and that they're fixed in our nervous system. And he conducted thorough and detailed studies of individuals, noting their outstanding traits as well as their behavior. This research then led him to conclude that traits are the building blocks of personality, and that person's behavior is a product of his or her combination of traits. That brings us to Raymond Cattell. Now, Raymond Cattell is our next chronological guy that is a trait theorist, and follows on the heels of Allport. And he tried to determine the number of basic traits human personality can be boiled down to, but he took an opposite approach from Allport, and he studies groups of people rather than individuals. So he's studying these groups, and he began by identifying certain obvious personality traits like integrity, and these obvious traits he called surface traits. Friendliness, tidiness are the surface traits. He called the obvious traits surface traits, and then he noticed that clusters or groups of surface traits seem to occur together, and that means that if a person showed one trait in a cluster, they usually showed the other traits in clusters as well. And so Cattell reasoned that a single underlying trait gives rise to all the other traits in the cluster, and then he called those the source traits. So the surface traits arise because of the source traits. Finally, Cattell settled upon 16 source traits and believed that the psychological measurement of these traits would enable us to predict people's behavior in various situations. Pretty good system. Now, these source traits are usually measured by Cattell's 16 personality factor questionnaire. This is known as the 16PF, and they look a little bit like this. When you take that questionnaire, the 16PF is frequently used in psychological research and explores differences between groups of people and individuals. It lists each source trait as part of a pair of opposites on a continuum, such as reserved versus outgoing and trusting versus suspicious. Our next trait theorist is Hans Eysenck. He worked with his wife Sybil, and they believe that we can reduce many normal human variations to two basic personality dimensions, which are introversion versus extraversion and emotional stability versus instability. Instability, that is, not instability. Now, you've probably heard the terms introversion versus extraversion. I know you've heard it from me. So introverts are your more imaginative, looking inward. Extroverts are more outward people. Now, the first to theorize about introverts versus extroverts is Carl Jung. The stable versus unstable people. Stable is reliable, composed rationally, and then unstable can be agitated and unpredictable. Eysenck also cataloged various personality traits according to where those traits appear within the dimensions of introversion and extroversion and emotional stability and instability. They'll lie in this circle somewhere, and an example is an anxious person might be highly introverted and emotionally unstable. A reckless person or impulsive person might be highly extroverted and unstable. So they're going to fit on this circle somewhere according to results on personality questionnaires. And that brings us to our most recent trait theory, and that is one of the Big Five Factor theory. You can remember the Big Five Factor theory by using a mnemonic device called OCEAN. The five factors that it is dependent upon is openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Today's trait researchers really rely on the five factors to understand personality using those five factors, and this term refers to recent research that suggests that there may be five basic personality dimensions. So these dimensions are kind of like a spectrum. You lie on the spectrum somewhere according to conscientiousness, agreeableness, extraversion, etc. Psychologists continue to disagree about which personality factors are the most basic. However, nearly all psychologists would agree that the big five personality dimension are important in defining a person's psychological makeup. Moreover, a person's position along these dimensions tends to be established at an early age and usually remains stable throughout life. How do we find out what traits we have? Well, we take personality inventories, and some of them are bogus, but some of them, you get good ones that are scientifically valid, then those are the ones you want to take. It helps to know that a potential date is an introvert or extrovert, so we might want to know that ahead of time, but they might not even know either. So the way to find out is take the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. They have a long set of questions, cover a wide range of feelings and behaviors. I'm sure that you can Google search them. And although the MMPI was originally developed to identify emotional disorders, it's also used to assess personality traits. We have projective tests like Rorschach tests. They're all subjective, so they can tell us a little bit, but it can also not be too objective, and objectivity makes it more scientific. People taking the MMPI for employment purposes can give answers they know will create a good impression, so you can beat the system in a personality trait. To conclude, the trait theorists are traits or characteristics that are consistent usually and stable over time. They focus on categorizing these traits, which traits are dominant. They're used for matching people, education programs, and such. It doesn't describe the origin of personality, but it does help us to describe, explain, and predict how a person's going to behave in certain scenarios. That's it for this lesson. I'll see you the next time for psychoanalysis and Sigmund Freud. Hey Warriors, welcome to the Theories of Personality. For some of you, this will be the lesson, the unit that you've been looking forward to. And it's chock full of information about, the hardcore information about psychology. It's trait... Hey students, welcome to lessons on theories of personality. For some of you, this will be the lessons that you have been looking forward to because these are the theories that make us who we are and the men and women who theorize about those. Hey students, welcome to our first lesson on theories of personality. Now for some of you, this will be the one that you've been looking forward to for a long time, because this is what truly unlocks the understanding of who we are and human behavior, or at least it's the theories from people who believe that they have the answers to those questions. In this lesson, we'll get into some of those trait theories. In this lesson, we'll start to investigate some of those theories and the drivers behind them. In this lesson, we'll get behind... Okay, I'm going to start all over.